So Smartabase is basically, it's an online data storage system which originated from Australia and is being employed with a lot of AFL clubs in Australia, a number of professional soccer clubs across Europe, and the GAA started using it 2 years ago. So basically it's for easy collection and storage of relevant information. So just a quick history as to how we use it. It was piloted in 2013. There was one county from each province piloted. Then in 2014 there was a full rollout of all 5 Connacht counties and a number of other counties from around the country. In 2015 the plan is to have a full national rollout. Okay, so just a quick introduction. So how it's used. It can be used through a website on the computer, laptops, iPad, Android iPads and tablets, through apps or through a Safari setting. So it's very easy and accessible. There's individual logins for managers and players, and the big thing with it is it cuts out a paper trail for managers and players, okay? And we'll talk, as I go through the different features, I'll speak about that. So I suppose just to set the scene as to why Crow Park here in the Coaching and Games department introduced Smartabase and why I took it on board down in Connacht and why we started using it. So I suppose just to take it back a small bit, the burnout report in 2007, which was done on 534 players at different age groups from minor, under 21 and young inter-county athletes. Basically what they found was that 1/3 of players played for at least 5 teams, and of that 26% played for 7+ teams, okay? 1/10 of them players were deriving little satisfaction from participating in Gaelic games. Basically they were being made play too much. Okay, 30% of them suffered from elevated physical and emotional exhaustion, okay? 42% of them felt isolated and felt resentment from their club as a result of participation with county teams. 47% of them said a lack of an official close season and a lack of cap on training has been a major issue for them. 36% said that there was very little communication between managers. So you can imagine if you're trying to play for 7+ teams, if there's no communication between the managers, it's a nightmare for a player, okay? 11% were pressurised into playing on a continual basis, and 9% pressurised into playing with a number of different teams and playing above their age group. So after that report, the findings weren't great. You would have thought that things would have got better. But there was a review done last year. There was a talk, some of you might have been at it this morning, the minor review group. 330 minor players last year were surveyed, and some of the stuff coming out of it is quite shocking, really. 24% of the players trained at least once a day, if not twice, every single day of the week. A further 27% trained a minimum of 6 days per week. So what we're saying is our minors from last year, 50% of them trained at least once, if not twice a day, 6 times a week. Okay, and these are players who are trying to do their leaving cert, study a couple hours in the evening, okay, and very little rest and recovery being added into their training program. Okay, 81% of them placed under pressure not to play other codes, okay? So county managers telling them not to play club, not to play schools and college competitions, okay? 62% of them played games while injured, which is very poor, very bad for their long-term development, and 42% of them experienced chronic fatigue sometimes or often, okay? Which would be expected if you're training that amount and trying to prepare for your leaving cert as well, okay? 35% of them desired less training sessions and also less travelling from training sessions, okay? So we'll refer back to that later on, so I'm just trying to set the scene as to why we use the different features on Smartabase. Okay, so the main features on Smartabase which we use for storage of a session attendance list, fitness testing and screening data, medical and injuries history, and monitoring of players' training load. Basically, the player has a specific login detail, okay? He logs in and sees his own specific testing results or medical data. Then the coach who's over the team can look at his 25 or 30 players, okay? The games manager can see everyone in the county, and I can see everyone in the province. That's the way it works. Okay, so how do we use each function? So just a session attendance list. It's easy for managers to use. They have their iPhone or their tablet at training. They log in, they have a preset list of names, and they tick in each of the players, and then they save it to the phone. Very easy. A lot of managers at the moment and in the past come with the Excel sheet and they're ticking it off, and that's to bring it to and from every training session, okay? So that cuts out a paper trail there for them. Very easy and accessible. So for the fitness testing and movement screening results, when we bring in the academy teams, we do the fitness testing on the different areas of fitness, such as speed and power, aerobic capacity and movement screens. We then put it into an Excel file and upload it onto the system, which makes it easy for the managers to access. It's very, very useful for a player's long-term development. So when a player comes into an academy squad at 14 or 15, we carry out basic screens and fitness testing results, and we tailor their program accordingly from the norms that we have gathered, which I'll speak more about in a few minutes. So when he goes through the academy squads, 14, 15, 16, 17, by the time he comes to 18, a minor manager then can look at his profile and see what training he has been doing, how he's been progressing through the years. Because what has been happening up to this is one manager takes him at 15, he hands him on to the next manager, there mightn't be any communication, he starts from scratch again. It's the same at 17s, same at 18s, okay? Right through to senior. So what we hope to have in 4 or 5 years when a player comes onto a senior squad, that the senior manager can see exactly what that player has been doing all the way along. So managers, as I said earlier, has access to the whole squad, and the players will be able to see their own individual results. So this is just a screenshot of what a coach might see. Okay, so up at the top here with the athlete's name, I just have some of them blocked out there, okay? So we have the height, weight, body fat, sit and reach, counter movement jump, standing long jump, bangs ball, max press ups, overhead squat, just some of the different tests that we use. Okay, so you can see here at the top, the first player has never been tested before, so his results just go in there. If you come to the second player here, if you watch the arrows pointing up, from the last time that he has been tested, his results have increased, okay? You can see here the sit and reach has decreased, okay? And what the color coding is about is we have different norms. So if a group under 16s come in from each of the counties, okay, you're getting 30 players in each of the counties. Then when they're added together, you have 150 players, and we take the top 20% and we look to see where they're at. So the top 20% there is the bright green, and the bottom 20% is in the red, okay? And it goes through to amber and up to red then. So basically, we tailor our programs around this as to what we've seen here, okay? And just in the next slide, so just taking body fat scores as an example. We have under 16s here, under 18s, and under 21s. So the top 20%, anyone under 6% body fat would be very good, okay? For an under 16, anyone over 12% would be quite poor, okay? So for that, if a player at under 16 would be over 12% body fat, we would then get them a small bit of help on nutrition and lifestyle. The same would go for counter movement jump or stand and long jump. Their power scores, they would be put on a strength program. If it's a bangs bow test, which is their aerobic capacity, they might have to do a small bit extra running, or their aerobic capacity would be developed through game-based sports, okay? So there's a lot of data here, sit and reach scores for flexibility. There's a lot of data in it, so if anyone wants to talk about it afterwards, we won't get bogged down with it here, but if anyone wants to talk about it afterwards, we can talk about it here. So you can see just as we fly through it, obviously as you go through, the grades and things start increasing, the physical fitness requirements also increase. So with max press-ups there, you can see there's an increase as you go through the age groups. Also with the bangs bow scores, which are very, very important for aerobic capacity in both Gaelic football and hurling. because it's a predominantly aerobic sport. So you can see how the demands are increasing there all the time. So next, how we use Smartabase is for recording medical and injury records. So basically, it keeps a history of the player's injuries and medical conditions. It can be inputted by the players, physios, or doctors. The entry is tailored specific to the needs of the player or the professional, okay? So obviously a player will be just asked 2 or 3 questions simply if they get injured. Then an email will, when they input it through their app, an email will be sent to the physio or doctor, okay? Then the doctor obviously fills out a far more comprehensive report. It's very important for long-term player development. Again, similar to the fitness testing. If you have a player who's getting injured at 14s, 15s, and he's passed on to the next manager, he might know about his injury problems, passed on to the 17th manager. When he comes to 18, then he'll more than likely get the same reoccurring injuries if it hasn't been dealt with properly, okay? So if a physio, when he comes to minor, can see that he's had a certain type injury, muscle type injuries, maybe all injuries on the one side of the body, he can do adequate screening and put him on programs to correct whatever the problem is. So this is just a screenshot of what a doctor or physio would fill in, okay? And then that would go on to the player's profile. So basically, you have the date and the time at the top. There's a image here from the front and from the back. I just have highlighted there the right hamstring. So basically, when you put the cursor over whatever particular muscle it is, it will highlight. You click that, okay? Then you will say whether they're able to continue training or not, yes or no, diagnose it, what grade of an injury it is it reoccurring, how painful it is, when they're expected back, and any additional comments. And one here at the bottom, which is very useful for coaches. Obviously, it will be preset at being able to train or play, but if they're unable to train, that will be pushed. And the manager, the coach, can then go in and see on a particular week or before training sessions what his list of players that are able to train that day, whether they're injured or not, okay? For players, basically from here down, from the question, they would only be asked where the injury is, are you able to continue, and give you a couple of lines on what exactly is the problem, okay? So it's obviously tailored for the different ones. So next one we use it is for athlete activity questionnaires, just to monitor what training loads they're doing. Okay, so the questionnaires are designed to monitor players' training loads, and also in academy squads, a lot of players can be playing different sports, playing for different teams out of their age group. So a particular academy coach may not know exactly what they're doing all the time. So this quantifies it for them, okay? It's filled in once a day through an app. It's a short questionnaire, takes 20 to 30 seconds to fill it in. The player receives a reminder text each evening at a preset time. So generally I set it for 9 or half 9 at night, because generally players train at half 7, 8 o'clock. You want them to get them to fill it out 20 to 30 minutes after they've trained, okay? It's very good for injury management and monitoring of training responses, which we'll talk a bit more about in a while. So I'm just going to explain how we calculate the training load, and this slide is important for the stuff I'm going to talk about in a minute. So RPE is basically a simple scale which is used to rate of perceived exertion, how hard a player found a training session. So it's basically from 0 to 10. 0 being rest, they didn't do anything. 10 being maximal, they literally couldn't have done any more, okay? What we do then is we multiply that by the total training time. So whether it was 60 minutes of a session, and that gives you your total training units. So if it was 10, if it was very hard, 10 multiplied by 60 minutes, that will give you 600 training units. Okay, so we'll just give a typical club week there. Train Tuesday, Thursday, game on a Saturday. So 80 minutes of a session multiplied by an RPE of 8, which would be just above hard but not maximal. Okay, gives you 600 training units for that particular training session. Same on Thursday, 80 multiplied by 5, which gives you 400. The session wasn't as hard, okay? Then the match on Saturday was 60 minutes, an RPE of 8, and that gives you 486, okay? So What we do then is we monitor over a 7-day cycle all the training sessions. So when you add each of them together, that gives you your total weekly load. Okay? And we'll talk in a few minutes about a few research studies as to what range this should be in for different players. Okay? So this is just an example of a simple questionnaire for an underage squad. Okay? So they'll push activity there. There'll be a little pop-down screen which will say, was it a gym session, was it a game, was it a training session out in the field, or was it a recovery, or were they just resting? The activity was so club, school, college, county. The sport will be preset at if it's football or hurling, but also there will be options there for rugby, soccer, swimming, whatever the case may be. Then you push in how long the session was, then your RPE scale. So this scale will pop up, they'll pick how hard it was, and they'll be asked how they felt on that particular day. Okay, very simple. Once you know how good young lads and girls are on phones now, they'll have it done in 15-20 seconds easily. Okay, this is an example of one that's been used with a senior team. So slightly more complicated type of training, how long they spent on the field, what their RPE was. They're then looking at their sleep, energy, mood, appetite, soreness, and injury. You'd hope that the injury would be no, but if they're off playing with their club or college, if yes comes up, basically there's a little pop-down menu, and remember the graphic we showed of the player from the front and the back. They will then identify what the injury is, and the email then will go out to the physio, and they'll be able to interact like that. Rather than the player coming to the training session, coach doesn't know that he's injured. Okay? So I suppose some of you are saying, so what? Why would we bother recording this data? Okay, so just one of the latest reviews on monitoring training for understanding fatigue in athletes. The main quote in it was, appropriate load management can aid in determining whether an athlete is adapting to the actual training program that you're putting in place and can minimize the risk of developing overreaching illness or injuries in players. Okay? And Annie, there was at Des Ryan's talk earlier, he spoke about Gabbett, a guy from Australia who has done an awful lot of research into monitoring training loads, and Des brings them over to Arsenal on a regular basis, upskilling their coaches in this area. And basically what he says, it's very important to get the balance between minimum training load required to elicit improvement in fitness and the maximum training load before you see marked increases in injury rates. So basically what he's saying is we have to train players hard enough so that they get fit, but not train them too hard that they're getting injured all the time and that you don't have them available for your training sessions or your games. So one of the main studies that Gabbett has done is to see the relationship between training loads and injuries in professional rugby league players. Okay? So what he found was that 50 to 80% of players were likely to get injured when training loads were between 3,000 and 5,000 training units, okay? And these were all soft tissue type injuries, not collision. Obviously it's a collision type sport. There'll be different joint type injuries in that type of sport, but we're talking mainly about, or solely about, hamstrings, groins, hip flexors, quads, all that type of stuff, okay? So what he's saying is 3,000 to 5,000 training units, okay? And if we go back to our table, the simple one that we showed earlier, might just flick back to it now. Here, that's training twice a week, and a game on a Saturday brings us to 1,520 training units. If we go back to our minor review, which said that 50% of our players were training for 6 days a week, once if not twice a day. If you put in a training session there, here, here, and here to fill the 7 days, you won't be long getting up to 3,000, 4,500, and maybe throw in a double session as well, okay? And that study that Gabbett is talking about, these are professional rugby players who have an average age of 24, fully developed, have all their day to recover. We're training our minor players 7 days a week, the majority of them, very little rest and recovery, and they're also expected to study for school 9 days a week, then go home and study for a few hours as well, okay? So What he also found was the later you went on in the phase of competition, obviously there's residual fatigue happening all the time. So these numbers go down. So you can't just keep training players hard all year round. It goes down to what he found between 1,700 and 3,000. Okay, so just going back to what Gabbett has said before, very important to train them hard so that they get fit. There's no point in wrapping them in cotton wool all the time either, but there's no point in training them too hard that they're getting injuries all the time. And just one of the things, there's not a whole pile of research done in GAA, but one of the very good pieces that started in 2007 was the Injury Surveillance Database, which basically collected all the different types of injuries that's happening in football and hurling. And it's no coincidence that the two reviews have shown that we are training our players too hard. Muscle type injuries, which shouldn't be happening if you're loading your players properly and training them, okay? 42% in GAA and 37% in hurling, okay? Way ahead of any other type sport, okay? All these other type sports, bone fractures, their collision, there's contact in the game, so they will happen. But this should not be happening up here, lads and ladies. Okay, so what's causing the training loads? Playing for several teams, as we've seen in the 2007 report. Training several times per week and sometimes more than once per week. Playing consecutive days and competitive games, okay? So in my opinion, what needs to change? No player, I don't think, should be playing senior if they're under 18, okay? I don't think the excuse of if they're good enough, if they're good enough, they're old enough. I don't think that's good enough excuse, which is generally the GAA thing to say. Inter-county players should not be playing college because there's too much going on for that block between January, February and March and April, okay? And that will result in far too high of training loads, and as a result of that, we'll see a lot of injuries. Schools players should not be playing with their county teams, county minor teams, county under-16 teams until the schools competition has finished. Under-21s I don't think should be playing senior until their particular season has finished also. And also I feel that all competitions need to be finished in the one calendar year, which I hope will go through this year at Congress. Also, probably there's too many competitions. I think what's happening at the minute is the warm-up competitions that are put in place they're all being taken as we have to win them. We have to win them. They're not being taken as what they're there for, as warm-up competitions for league and for championship. It's a win at all cost mentality, no matter what game that you're training in, or whatever team you're preparing for. I think as coaches we need to get rid of the egos. So what I mentioned there about schools players shouldn't be playing with their county teams until the school competition is over. I think if a schools team is getting on pretty well in their competition, I think a county coach needs to have a small bit of respect and say to the schools coach, well, I think you're good enough to coach my player. Whenever you're out of the competition, let him come back in and let him be fresh, and then we'll train him from there. There's no point in trying to burn it from both ends and burn the player out altogether. I think one thing we just need to realise that these young players are not machines or mini adults. They're children at the end of the day, and you can't just keep training them and training them and training them without giving them any rest and recovery. Okay? So just a few future perspectives and where we hope to go with the Smartabase, because obviously we're only collecting data for the last 18 months or so. Hope to be able to get more accurate testing norms, which will allow us to program better for the different age groups, and also identify problem areas in the area of physical fitness so that we can put in interventions earlier. Okay, so the problem isn't manifesting. Also, get age-appropriate links between training load and medical data. So we looked at rugby league players. Between 3,000 and 5,000 training units is for professional rugby league players. Maybe that might correlate to senior county players. I think it probably will be a small bit less, because obviously they've less rest and recovery with them working all day. But obviously, in turn, that obviously won't be the same for an under-16 player. So we need to find some ranges for that so that coaches can relate it back to. Also, age-appropriate links between the fitness testing results, the movement screening results, training loads, and the medical data. So is it a problem with the player's fitness level? Is that why they're getting injured? Is it their poor movement skills? Is that why they're getting injured? Or are we just training them too hard? Or is it a combination of them all? It's probably a combination of them all. In the coming years, I think with the way technology is developing, GPS will be freely available in the next 5 to 10 years, and we'll be able to start recording that data and getting proper norms for game demands and training loads and that type of stuff. And also integrate a software which we've started using with one of the academy squads called Visual Coaching, which is an extra aid where the player can go into it. His weights program or his running program or his skills program is put up onto it. There's a video link, explanation, and all that type of stuff on it, where the player can do some training on his own, that he doesn't have to be traveling all the time. Okay, so they're just some of the future perspectives and questions now. I hope it has been of interest to some of you.